Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. And welcome to our Global Energy and Utilities Digital Week webinar, titled Developing Vietnam's Energy Industry. I'm Joel Morgan, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I have a few short announcements to make. Firstly, we recommend you use Google Chrome browser to access the webinars. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and the dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn more about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of the presentations. Towards the end of the webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey, which is found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a moment to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information how we can improve future events. And lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and our technical team will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now on to today's presenters. I'm joined by Mr. Lim Cho Gi, who's the General Director at Tricor Vietnam, and Mr. Logan Knox, who's the General Director and CEO at UPC Renewables Vietnam. To learn more about either of our speakers, please click on the bios widget. With the formalities taken care of, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Mr. Lim Cho Gi. Over to you, Cho Gi.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Yeah, a very good day to everyone. Yeah, welcome to Vietnam's discussion on renewable energy. It's a very, very exciting time to discuss about the renewables in Vietnam. So this is a time when there's a massive development of capacity in the Vietnamese renewable energy sector. At the same time, we have a lot of confluence of the external factors that is affecting the industry, including COVID-19 and other development relating to oil price, global oil price, and so on. So today, my task and my discussion point is to share with everyone about a certain macro overview on the renewable energy sector in Vietnam, and in particular, looking at the investment opportunities that is abundant during these times into both solar and also wind. And I also deep dive into the M&A landscape, in terms of the landscape itself, and also the procedures, the legal and compliance procedures in order to have a successful M&A in Vietnam. I'm Cho Gi. I'm based in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. I've been here for the last 14 years, and in my company, we are specialized. We have a specialized team supporting renewable companies investing into Vietnam, into areas like EPC or project ownership, and including M&A activities for the Vietnamese energy sector. A quick one about Tricor Group. We are present in quite a number of countries, and in Hong Kong and Singapore, we probably service more than half of the public listed companies in these two cities. In Vietnam, we have a team of about 80-90 consultants who are legal graduates, accountants, tax advisors, and also involved in payroll and HR services. So let's go straight into the landscape of the Vietnam RE. In the slide that I'm having in front of me, you do see the projection under the Vietnam Power Development Plan number 7, which is up to the end of 2020. You do see the projection here from 2015 until 2030 under the PDP-7. PDP-7, there's a revision of the total constituent of the energy contribution in Vietnam, rising from close to 4+% to 10.7% in 2030. And that is the renewable energy sector on the first line here, excluding the hydro. Hydro capacity in Vietnam has been well exploited and perhaps have reached a certain level of saturation. But the RE sector, which is solar and wind, still have a long way to go. And we're talking about 10.7%, which compares or contrasts with, say, in Germany, which is beyond 30, 40-ish, and other countries within ASEAN, which is also having double-digit type of total contribution to the energy sector. Yeah. Now, moving ahead, yeah, this 10.7%, which we have seen just now, where does it come from? Yeah, and in this slide that we are having in front of us, we do have the contribution from 3 different areas. Of more of high level interest would be the wind and solar. If you look at the solar energy, which is the little yellow or brown color here, we have the solar energy sector planned for 800 over megawatt. Yeah, this was under the 2016 to 2020 plan. But if you look at the situation in by end of 2019, yeah, we already reached close to 4 gigawatt of capacity. And that, if you look at the chart here, from 2025 to 2030, the capacity of the solar energy, especially ground-mounted, has been reached already based on the current targets. Now, what is of potential here will be the wind energy sector, which will be building up from 2020 all the way to 2030, where we are talking about 6 gigawatt of a contribution from the wind sector. Now, so what is interesting to note here is that the solar ground-mounted has been, in some ways, many licenses has been issued with a very attractive FIT, which you'll see in the next slide. And through the introduction of the very attractive FIT, a lot of foreign investors have come in together with the local partners, local project owners have developed ground-mounted solar, which exceeded the target for 2019 already. So let's move on to the next slide here. Yeah, on the left-hand side, there's a table which shows the FIT rate for different classes of RE. And one can see here for ground-mounted solar, the rates when it was launched, when the whole scheme was introduced in Vietnam, it was 9.35 cents, which is extremely high. Yeah? And for those who are looking at the history of the FIT, yeah, in certain countries, the rates have gone down to like sub 4 cents per kilowatt. And Vietnam started off the ground-mounted solar with 9.35. Of course, this is for the projects which are COD by the end of 30th June 2019, the date which have expired. And subsequent projects in Vietnam attract a much lower rate. For example, for those ground-mounted solar which are to be COD'd by end of December this year, we are talking about 7.09 cents. And if you look at wind power has started off with rather attractive. The onshore wind is 8.5, and the offshore one is exceeding 9 cents per kilowatt. So these are all highly attractive FIT rates. And Vietnam today, due to the high FIT rates, is still very attractive for investors who are coming in to work together with local partners to secure projects. Now, what are the issues with the RE sector? Yeah, FITs are very attractive, but we have been addressing many issues relating to the bankability of the model PPA. The power purchase agreement is provided as part of the regulation. So there are certain issues relating to the model PPA, which if it's not addressed, yeah, would result in the low level of bankability for the investors. For example, issues relating to the termination, grid curtailment risk. Yeah, the curtailment risk which are currently faced by many of the ground-mounted solar, especially in the 2 provinces of Ninh Thuận and Vinh Thuận, 2 provinces in Vietnam which are of very high radiation, and significant number of projects have been invested and COD'd within the last until 2019. So there was a curtailment because the transmission grid is not ready to receive the high level of production from those 2 areas. Then other things will be like force majeure term, the changes in law, and also the USD and VND issue, the convertibility of the currency, because the model PPA require Vietnam Dong as the currency stated in the contract. Yeah. Now, due to all these issues with bankability, a lot of the investors would have not many choices but to rely on either local financing from local banks in Vietnam, which comes with a fairly high rate of interest, and certainly with some development banks or agencies that are coming in with funds which are cheaper but with the agenda for development, and also private equity funds. Yeah? So these have, in some ways, imposed a constraint on the ability for the project owners, especially for larger projects, to secure funding to kickstart the investment. Yeah. Now, moving next will be discussion on the M&A. Now, M&A in Vietnam has never been an easy task. The regulations and the landscape relating to M&A is still in its infancy. Yeah, certainly there are laws which are already being passed in the framework of the law of investment or law of enterprise, and also circulars and decrees which are sub-regulation issued under the relevant laws, which are being issued to guide on the M&A. But still, there are many issues relating to M&A which have not been adequately addressed through the regulation. Yeah. In the slide that I have in front of me, we have two portions. One is the greenfield investment. So for those investors that are coming in to invest from greenfield, there are steps involved. In particular, getting the in-principle investment approval, the investment registration certificate, and the enterprise registration, which are all done before other activities like feasibility study, land clearance can be done. And at the end of this, you'll see there's a little PPA which is signed with the power authority. Yeah? Now, in order to implement a greenfield investment, the critical part of this, in terms of ground-mounted solar, is the securing the land lease. And land lease is quite a complex area in terms of the investment landscape in Vietnam, and due to many reasons, many factors which I will not delve in depth, greenfield investment typically for solar ground-mounted will be taken up or spearheaded by local Vietnamese groups, where they will be obtaining licenses from the authorities and the land use right before they can start the construction. And typically for foreign investors, they will come in and acquire from the greenfield investors, which are Vietnamese groups or Vietnamese individuals. When the permits have been issued, the foreign investors will come in and joint venture or acquire the company or the SPV company from the local Vietnamese vendor or partners. And from there, the EPC contract and the construction will start. So the point of entry for ground-mounted solar is when the foreign investors acquire the capital or shareholding from the local Vietnamese company, and upon the transfer of shares, the EPC or the construction activities will start. So step 1 to 5 on the right-hand side of my slide here deals in detail with the step-by-step procedures required to implement the M&A. And what I'd like to highlight here, instead of going in depth into all these steps, what I'd like to highlight here is that for the foreign investor to acquire shares or capital from local company, first you need to have the M&A approval or the capital transfer approval from the relevant authorities. And then there are very clear procedures involved in making the settlement for the transfer, the tax filing for the transferor, and the necessary investment procedures to get the enterprise registration certificate, which is also called the company's paperwork documents, to reflect the new shareholders. Yeah. So all these steps are already very, there's a high level of clarity under the laws and regulation in Vietnam. So for the foreign investors coming into the renewable energy sector, especially for ground-mounted solar, it's not because of the lack of regulation or lack of guidance from the existing legal framework, but it's more on the implementation. Yeah, what we will say is the devil's in the details. Yeah, when one goes through the details of implementing M&A, there could be a lot of small little details, small little procedures, small little administrative issues that can hold back on the implementation of the M&A. Yeah? And if I may go to the next slide here, which is quite a detailed schematic on how we look at the M&A, and I'm focusing here on the ground-mounted solar. For wind power and so on, the backdrop is a bit different because we are not dealing with a piece of land. Yeah. So now let's look at ground-mounted. Yeah. Typically, before acquisition, the Vietnamese project owners that have secured license for the energy projects, they would have set up a SPV or a Vietnamese enterprise in order to own the license to the project. And earlier on, I mentioned about the investment approvals that have been granted to this company. Yeah? So what normally happens is that the FDI co, or the foreign investors, in many instances would be setting up their intermediate holding company for example, in Singapore, or could be any other jurisdiction, which is easier for capital transfer or the share transfer in the future. And this Singapore holding company will be the one that acquire the shares or the capital from the Vietnamese owner. Now, the acquisition, as I mentioned earlier in my previous slide, entails the application for M&A approval from the foreign party. And upon the approval, shares are transferred over, and then the project can commence with the construction activities by the EPC contractor over here. Now, very often, many of the ground-mounted investors who are also involved in the EPC, there may be a plan to divest upon COD, to divest the project to funds or even to major energy players. And in particular for Vietnam, we do see a large influx of regional energy players, be it from Thailand or funds coming from Singapore. They're coming in to invest in ground-mounted and also the wind projects. Yeah. Now, some of the things that I like to highlight here relating to the M&A is very often for larger projects, especially the Vietnamese project owner who have secured the license may not have the sufficient capital to meet with the requirement of the investment approval. To be more specific, for investment into renewable energy, one needs to put in 20% of the total project value, which we call the investment value. At least 20% would come from the equity contribution. And with the proliferation of projects in Vietnam, a lot of new solar projects mushrooming in the last 24 months, there are insufficient local groups that have the capital to invest and embark in large projects, especially when we talk about ground-mounted, which is exceeding, let's say, 100 megawatt and so on. The size of capital is extensive. So therefore, when the project have not been sufficiently funded from the beginning, there are some issues during the M&A where the foreign investors have to be very aware of, and how to resolve those issues are part of the structuring work during the M&A that my company and I will be supporting client. And especially Vietnam being a country where the foreign exchange control is highly regulated, or strictly regulated, one has to be very careful in implementing M&A from a perspective of the investment procedures, coupled with the flow of funds in the context of the foreign exchange control in Vietnam. So a lot of details are here, but what I'd like to highlight is that one would need to be very, very careful in terms of looking at the details of how M&A will be implemented. Yeah. Now, point number 5 here, we talk about the risk mitigation strategies or risk mitigation terms. Typically, investors who come in would like to have those terms in the SPA so that they can jointly take up the risk together with the Vietnamese project owner. With a simple situation where we discussed earlier, PPA is not bankable. In many instances, some factors result in the low level of bankability. Therefore, the local project owner that comes together with the foreign investor will need to jointly bear the risk, and one will need to look very carefully at how those risks could be mitigated. Yeah. Now, moving next, there is a slide with a lot of details here. This is just to share with all of us here what Tricor can support with the execution from the buy side. Yeah. Now, we provide financial and tax due diligence, and together with lawyers. In fact, Tricor have been working with quite a lot of law firms which are highly specialized in the renewable energy sector, facilitate the joint financial tax duty together with the legal duty. And it's very important for all of these parties to come together, because during the closing of the SPA, there will be a need to come together to look at the valuation of the business and how FTDD, how the financial and tax duty would impact on the valuation would be considered together with how the lawyers draft the sales and purchase agreement. Yeah. Now, the next step that we can assist is the investment procedures leading to the issuance of the new, what we call the enterprise registration certificate, which bear the name of the new investors. So the rest of this, I will not go through in detail, but suffice to say, there's a need to pay attention to the highly specific regulation relating to capital transfer and also the fund flow in Vietnam. Yeah. Now, one of the questions that has been posed to me by the organizer is, in the context of all the issues that we have mentioned, landscape of renewable energy, the regulatory issues, the FIT, and so on. What are the factors that can promote or motivate foreign investors to come in further? And I'm resting on the on giant shoulder. Yeah, we look at the Vietnam's energy outlook, which has been published by a few institutions and agencies. And over here, there are a few very solid recommendations on how the whole RE, renewable energy landscape, can be improved. Let me pick a few of these. First is there's a need to have a one-stop shop or one-stop agency where licenses can be obtained to embark on RE projects. Stability in terms of long-term plans and target, especially for example, FIT. We don't have high level of clarity on FIT beyond 2021 for the wind sector, and beyond end of 2020 for the ground-mounted sector. So especially for large project with a long planning horizon, there's a necessity to have all these being clarified in advance so that investors can plan accordingly. The third point here I'd like to maybe pick is the international standard PPA. Vietnam has the model PPA, which is part of the legislation, but if certain terms of the international standard APPA can be implemented, I believe the investors, the funds and the investors will be more incentivized to partake in this sector. Now, other things that I may just look through would be maybe the movement of FIT to the competitive auction, which is already implemented for some of the regional countries around Vietnam, for example, Malaysia, and also in Taiwan, in Thailand, for example. Yeah. Now, so I think I would stop here, and later during the Q&A, there will be an opportunity for all of us to discuss and go through some of the issues that I discussed in more detail. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not sure if anyone can hear me right now, but there was some disturbances that went through the system, and I will come in and start presenting. So I will just push. So thank you very much for the introduction. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about, after CG's introduction to Vietnam, about UPC Renewables, our company and our background and what we're doing in Vietnam, and then talk a little bit about the Vietnam market, and then open it up to questions thereafter. So as a background, UPC, we are a global renewable energy developer, constructor, and operator of renewable energy projects. And we've been doing this for about 20 years as a private company, just owned by a handful of individuals that is involved in the day-to-day management of the business. And we have experience firstly in Italy, and then North America, but we've been focused in Asia for about the past, 15 years, since 2006. And we've mostly done wind. That's been about 80% of what we've done so far, and 20% has been solar. And in aggregate, we've deployed about 4.5 gigawatts across all of our businesses that we formed, as well as a total of 73 projects in aggregate. So we're involved at the very, very beginning of the project, like Chogi talked about, in terms of going to find the project at the very beginning. Where is it windy? Where is it sunny? And then take that through all the way through the permitting process, starting construction, staying in the project, not just selling the project like many developers do. We then stay in through construction, see the construction management and operation into the operation phase. And then we like to stay as a long-term owner in our projects through the life of the project. Sometimes, that's 5 years, 10 years, but hopefully 20 years. And so this is an overview of our management. Our team consists of about 150 individuals. I think today it actually might be slightly higher than this, with all of our management sitting in the markets we work in. So we're very much of the opinion that if you want to be in a market, it needs to be in a fashion that you're hands-on in the market in which you operate. So myself, I was introduced by Joel earlier. I'm the director and CEO of the Vietnam business. I sit in Ho Chi Minh City, as well as the team that's at the top right of the table. And then all the other directors sit in their various markets. And we try and basically be in the communities that we're operating in and in the markets that we're operating in. And the reason we do that is we found that we can utilize our experience over 20 years and try and bring all these different lessons learned to the projects and the markets that we operate in. And so what we try and do is we try and bring first-class engineering and development processes and procedure that we've built up through the years, because renewable energy is very different from market to market, but many things stay the same. So there's always permitting. Now, the way that permitting structure works will vary from market to market, but some of the core principles stay the same. So we bring those lessons learned from how we develop projects in the past, and then apply them locally and adapt them. As well, on the financing, we find that raising capital, there's very much in terms of raising money and M&A and things like that, that the world's very global now. And so you can take sort of this knowledge of how you fundraise projects in different parts of the world and bring that into the markets that you work in. We've always had a very hands-on approach. So rather than do like a full EPC contract, we find that you actually reduce your risk by not doing an EPC, by actually assigning people in your company to be handling and responsible and manage the interfaces, rather than putting that to an external party, because it allows the company itself, who has a much higher interest in seeing the project be successful than a contractor, to manage that control. And as we bring it in, we also have to manage the environmental health and safety. So health and safety is very important to us. And on the environmental side, getting a project which has a full environmental social impact assessment, that it mitigates all the risks to the stakeholders, the communities, and the environment is very important to us. So we take all those lessons learned, and then we try to adapt it to the local market. What we've learned in Vietnam so far is a very fast market. Like, for example, on the solar side, I don't know the exact total number, but it was somewhere on the order of about 100 megawatts of solar was installed in 2017, when the feed-in tariff was announced for solar. And then just 2 years after that, in June of last year, there was 5 gigawatts, so 5,000 or 50 times as much solar installed. So it's an incredibly fast market, and you have to be able to react quickly. Something we've learned about Vietnam. The local regulatory landscape, as CG talked about, is in some sense, it's very clear. There's a clear set of guidelines and processes and procedures. You need to do this step, and then it's this step, and then it's this step. And so you can find that sort of puzzle pieces. Where many players often get sort of slipped up and tripped up is that because M&A and investment and foreign investment particularly is kind of new, then it's not always clear how these laws interact. And a lot of the subtasks are, you see this sort of milestone that you need to do, but the pieces below that to get that total milestone are often not understood. And so it's important to work with, a company that understands the legal framework, or build up that in-house IP very strongly. And then for a company like us, what we've realized and what we bring is to take all of that information that we have sort of aggregated around the world, and then deploy it locally with a big workforce. So for example, in our Ho Chi Minh City offices, which I sit in right now, we have about 50 staff, and continue to grow that. As I said, we prefer to insource things rather than outsource them. And because we do that, we sort of have a series of results, and those results result in internationally quality projects in terms of gold standard projects, GSG and ESHA, which overall makes for a better project. It helps for the financing, it helps with our relations with the communities, and it just makes things more difficult in terms of the development process, but a much better resulted product. It also makes us become a company that's not afraid to take risks. We calculate the risks, we figure out what are the risks in the market, and then we take those risks. And overall, it's paid off to be able to take those. And not every project goes through for sure, but if you take calculated risks, which is a must in Vietnam, it can pay off. And then we find it allows to have, it just makes a financially stronger company and a more sustainable company that, as we've seen for about 20 years, and a team that can grow and basically take over the market in the long term. For example, in our own offices, we only have about 4 or 5 expats and a team of 50. So we've replicated that in many markets. We've done it in, as I said, we started in Italy in the late 1990s, building about 1,000 megawatts there, 1,000 turbines there over 10 years, about 600 megawatts. And that was because the turbines were much smaller back then, 250 kilowatt. Now they're 2.5 megawatt or 10 times or 20 times the size, up to 5 megawatt. And so a lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. And we've taken that experience and moved it across. And so the second market that we entered was into the United States and Canada. And that started in 2002. And over the course of about 10 years, we also built about 1,000 megawatts. As I mentioned, we came to Asia in 2006. All of our management is now located in Asia. And we first started in China, where we have a business there. And we started that in 2006. It's a very tough market, but one we've been able to be successful in, albeit slower than we had anticipated. And then in Southeast Asia, we have a business in the Philippines where we have an 81 megawatt project. And we also commissioned 2 years ago the first utility scale wind farm in Indonesia. And then we have a business in India and Australia. But as it relates to Vietnam, as I said, we have a team here. We also just started this month the construction of 60 megawatts in Vietnam, which is a particularly challenging time to do so given the world health issues that are going on with the coronavirus. But we're moving forward here and are very, very active and excited about the Vietnam market. So now I'll switch over into why we're so excited about the Vietnam market and why our audience might be as well. So if you look at the macro and the reason that we decided to come to Vietnam, CG mentioned that the FIT price, the feed-in tariff price for wind power, is attractive at 8.5. Well, it was announced in late 2018 that there would be a feed-in tariff of 8.5 cents, but actually there was a feed-in tariff in place prior to that. It was at 7.8 cents, which was not attractive. And that even started as early as in 2012. And it basically very, very little happened. And the government realized that they needed to increase the feed-in tariff. And so they did make it 8.5. But when we entered, there was no feed-in tariff at 8.5. It was at 7.8. And we took sort of a macro view that this is a market that has all of the fundamentals that it will get there. It may not get there next year or the year after, but the next 5-10 years, there will be a market here. And so we should build up projects to be able to take advantage of that when it transpires and the market takes off. And so what are those building blocks? One of the main building blocks is there's a tremendous amount of demand here for energy. So more than most markets, Vietnam is taking off, and that's got a huge industrial base that continues to grow. And right now it's seeing double-digit growth in its electricity consumption. So you've got a huge amount of power that's needed. And then you've got the power supply. And on the power supply side, as CG mentioned, there was an enormous amount of hydropower that has been built in Vietnam. You've got many, many rivers that sort of stretch across the country and come down. The Mekong River, as well as up near Hanoi and the northern part of the country, there's just tremendous hydropower resources. But most of those, as you mentioned, have already been utilized. There's a dam there, and there's a lot of power being created. So over time, there was a huge, almost half the power came from hydropower, and that percentage has dropped as the demand has gone up because hydropower is as he basically mentioned, is saturated. So that's that. Then you've got thermal. On the thermal side, you've basically got coal, oil, and LNG. Now, Vietnam has based a huge amount of its future on coal. And if you are familiar with what has happened recently, the Ministry of Industry and Trade, which is the Vietnamese government authority, which is responsible for the power supply, has just published a report on the Power Development Plan 7. And the Power Development Plan 7, as he mentioned, is every 5 years, the country is a centrally planned country. So they plan out, okay, for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, where is our power going to come from to feed this growth? And they do that every 5 years and revise it. So in Power Development Plan 7, there's a huge expectation of coal. And what has happened is that a lot of that coal is delayed. I mean, substantial amount of it is delayed. And that includes reasons for the coal supply. Vietnam, in terms of its resource, has coal. But it has enough to sort of feed the current amount. It does not have enough domestically in terms of its mining to produce a substantially amount. I mean, like double, triple, 4 times the amount of coal production is just not there. So it will have to be imported. So there's some delays on those contracts. There's delays also on the financing. And more what we've seen is that, basically the financiers around the world and the insurers are moving further and further away from coal as the Paris Agreement has been signed. And, the climate change, particularly, we see as a very big issue as a company, but more and more everyone around the world is seeing this as an issue and so therefore people are more afraid to finance. So we believe that number will actually drop substantially in terms of what's implemented on the coal side. And then on oil-fired oil, oil is expensive. It's the same thing, quite a lot of emissions. And they don't have very much of it yet. They may need to in case the things don't progress as fast as they otherwise might. And you've got LNG, and there's a tremendous amount of LNG interest right now. Some of the first projects have just been added and are being built, but the price of power for LNG again is not that low. And we see that ultimately becoming more expensive over time with renewables getting less expensive. So we see that there's going to be a mix as there is in every grid, but that renewables has a very big chance to contribute. And then the other thing is on the wind side, Vietnam has a very long coast and it's got tremendous potential. So this is the next slide shows that potential on the wind side. And what you see on the left is a map of the country. And pretty much it's scaled to where the way wind works as a technology is the faster the wind speed, the more energy there is, the greater resource, the more electricity you can get out of it. And it's logarithmic, meaning if you have, we measure that in meters per second. So if you have 5 meters per second wind, or you have 10 meters per second, the 10 meter per second wind actually has triple the amount of energy of 5 meters per second, not double. And so high wind speeds matter. Well, Vietnam, if you look at this map, most of the wind, there is wind throughout the country, but compared to the rest of the world, it's relatively low in terms of historic wind markets. And why is that? Well, it's due to the Coriolis effect, and the strongest wind speeds are at the north and south poles, and so closer you are to the equator, a number of reasons. But historically, wind projects, say 5 years ago, needed to be 8, 9, 10 meters per second. And what has happened over time is that has changed. What you see in this graph is Vietnam is in between 4 to 7 meters per second. The whole country has a vast amount of that kind of wind speed. But it has not been enough to power historical wind turbines and therefore get enough electricity production at a 7.8 cent tariff to make the economics work. Now, Vietnam has benefited from a trend that's gone on around the world. What is that trend? If you look on the right, you see the projection of the Asia Pacific forecast for wind is only going to go up. Now, traditionally around the world and historically, which makes sense, is, as I said, that faster wind speeds means more electricity. So all of the developers, including ourselves, anyone involved in wind, you always want to go out to the strongest wind speed site for the most part, unless it's on the very top of a mountain. But what's happened as the industry has grown over the years, over the last 20 years, is more and more wind power projects have been located in those wind speed areas that are very high. And so if you get into the wind industry and you want to go to a wind farm, there's already a wind farm where the best wind is. And so what happens is the growth is going up, but the resource is still available, but it's at lower and lower wind speeds. And so the turbine manufacturers, while they used to make turbines that would get high wind speeds, they now have to adapt those machines to handle low wind speeds. And so in Asia, on the left side of the screen, you can see these different classes. The color coding, if you think of it, the red represents very, very high wind speeds, and the green represents very, very low wind speeds, or low medium wind speeds, and blue even being lower than that. And so what you can see is the majority of turbines that have been sold are more and more suitable for lower and lower wind speed sites. And so they design them that way. Now, Vietnam has benefited from that. And so what has happened is, over the course of the last 5 or 10 years, the technology that has shifted towards lower and lower wind speed sites, and machines that would not have been able to work in Vietnam, whereas a wind project, for example, would not have been able to work in Vietnam, say 2 or 3 years ago. Now there's a turbine that will work for it. And so you see the economics, particularly work when the government has increased the tariff, work even better. And so there's a tremendous amount of excitement now for it, and a tremendous amount of potential as the industry moves closer and closer to that. And because of all those things, as well as government incentives, Vietnam has moved up on the scale of attractiveness in terms of a rating for a prospective wind power developer. It's 3.5 out of 5 is rated in Wind Power Monthly's July issue, which was just last month. And so that is coupled, for those reasons I said, on the fundamentals. And then on the government side, you've seen a tremendous amount of support. For example, they just approved 7,000 megawatts of new wind power projects just last month. Or was it in June? Sorry, so 2 months ago. As well as a discussion to have more being approved. And we think the targets will increase further, but just with the normal targets, there's a tremendous amount of growth here. And so there's also, a proposal to extend the feed-in tariff. We'll see whether or not that takes place. So all the fundamentals are there. There is strong government support, but there remains challenges. And as CG said, there's, and I mentioned at the beginning, there's quite a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities. So the opportunities we covered: strong electricity growth, strong government commitments. In fact, the Vietnam government has just committed to further reduce, 2 weeks ago, they announced to further reduce another 1% their emissions target by 2030. So we still see that. And the excellent renewable resources. So again, stable wind throughout the country. On the challenges side, CG mentioned the power purchase agreement terms. So the terms, as he mentioned, are not bankable. What's that mean? It means you can't get project financing in a traditional sense, where the sponsor doesn't have a guarantee to the project, the lender just injects a loan into the project, and then it works on its own. So you have to provide a guarantee, or you have to provide a sort of intricate financing structure, which is much more complicated than a normal structure, and more importantly, much more expensive. And so because of that, the consequence is basically that renewables are more expensive in Vietnam than they otherwise could be. I mean, if we had a very solid power purchase agreement, offtake agreement, we could instantly drop the price of power to the ultimate consumer. But that is not the case at present. So we have to deal with that issue. On the complexity of permitting, I mentioned that everything can seem clear, but you really must get down into the details to figure it out. And it takes experience to do so. It's not something you can just hire someone to understand everything. You really need to get multiple data points. And then finally, the shortest challenge is we only have 455 days or 445 days until the feed-in tariff expires for wind, and there's no guidance beyond that. So any developer like ourselves, we're moving forward on new projects, but it's sort of on faith that the macro, there is no clear guidance of if you start a project, say 6 months from now, that is clearly going to finish by the end of after October 2021, how will that look like? And we hope that they will extend it, but still, it's not clear whether or not that's going to happen and what that will look like. So that's basically it. I think we can go to Q&A. Joel, I will let you try and take over. You there?
Thank you, Logan. A very informative presentation. And now, before we begin with today's Q&A, a little housekeeping. If you could direct your attention to our webinar survey, which is at the bottom of the presentation window. We'd like to thank you in advance for completing the feedback form. Your participation in the survey allows us to better serve you. And now we can proceed to our Q&A. So as mentioned, the audience has been submitting questions as the first two presentations have been running. So now we will take a quick look at what has been submitted and ask our experts for their thoughts. And if we are not able to answer all submitted questions during this session, we'll be sure to share them with our speakers who can reply to you offline. Okay, so the first question, this came in quite early during Mr. Lim's presentation. Chorgi, you summarized Vietnam Power Development Plan PDP-7. You mentioned that there has since been a PDP-8. The question was, how will this impact the future for renewable energy activity in Vietnam? Perhaps you could give us an overview of what PDP-8 entails and the opportunities that that presents.
Thanks, Joel. I think we are talking about crystal balling the future. Yeah, but from the discussions in the community and also the initiative by government leading to the PDP-7 and also the subsequent years plan, I think a few things that could be highlighted. Yeah, number one, and Logan perhaps later would also chip in to discuss this from the industry perspective. I think the first one is that there's a need to look into so-called balancing down the coal contribution, because right now coal-fired power is still more than 50%, and I'm sure the CO2 emission target based on more than 50% of coal will require Vietnamese government to look at a higher level of renewables. And looking at the current situation with ground-mounted solar, the target for 2025 already reached in 2020. And for wind power, I'm very sure within the next few months, you'll be hearing what Logan has mentioned just now. Approval has been granted for a few gigawatt of wind power already. And that is beyond the current target. Now, looking ahead will be maybe more competitive pricing, moving from FIT to auction. And in particular, also the transmission infrastructure needs to be upgraded. I also think that the industry will look forward to the balancing of the investment instead of approving investment in areas which are highly dense already, like Ninh Thuận, Binh Thuận, where there's a curtailment at the moment. Perhaps there's a need to rebalance the approvals to areas, for example, the Mekong Delta for wind power and the North Central for wind power, which does not coincide with the area which the solar power generation is very intense. So this is to avoid having a curtailment for some of the projects that are already being built here. Yeah, that's my look at it. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Choggi. Okay, the audience seems to be getting a bit more involved now with the Q&A, but if you do have a question and are yet to submit it, please do type in the Q&A box and we will look at that now. Okay, so the next one, I believe this is directed towards Logan. We have a comment here. Vietnam has Southeast Asia's only offshore wind farm. How do you see the future and potential for offshore wind farms in Vietnam? And
It is true, Joel. Thank you for that.
Okay.
It is true that it has Southeast Asia's only offshore wind farm at the moment. What's interesting, though, is that a tremendous amount of offshore wind farms have been announced recently. And so in Vietnam, there's sort of you've got onshore, which is clearly on land. Then there's what we have these coastal wind farms, which are very much sort of intertidal, as in they're close to the beach, not really way out in the ocean. They're close to the shore. And then there's true offshore, 10, 20 kilometers away. And so what we see right now is that there's a huge interest in this sort of intertidal nearshore projects that we think will be an enabler for the longer term offshore. What's clear is the renewable resource is huge. So in terms of if, again, you go to the macro view, there's a tremendous amount of potential there. There's huge challenges, though. So right now, I think there's something on the order of 500 megawatts of these intertidal projects that have started construction now. And those will pave the way for a huge amount of learning for an industry that will grow substantially, because there's a pretty strong offshore oil and gas industry in Vietnam. A lot of the sort of the basis to get in terms of company and industry and knowledge is there. But there's a huge gap to getting to true offshore, and true offshore requires really trying to push down the prices. It's a nascent technology, it's a nascent industry, but the cost of offshore is dropping around the world quite a lot. I think the struggle will be that Vietnam needs it to come down further, and it needs commitments of very, very large projects to drive down those costs. So they need, ports installed that can handle this, and factories, and a whole industry. And so the beginning, if you look at the closest one, would be Taiwan, which has just, launched its offshore industry. And they had huge amount of commitment from the government, as well as a very, very good contract on the power purchase agreement. I think one thing there, so I think the fundamentals there are really are in place. It's will the government enable sort of the regulatory framework as well as the power purchase agreement to be solid enough to allow billions of dollars of investment, because offshore requires quite a lot of money. And, to really bet billions of dollars, you need a solid offtake contract to sell your electricity.
We've had a request from the audience. Could you give us an overview of the cost comparison between offshore and onshore wind farms?
Sure. So, in terms of the feed-in tariff, for example, in Vietnam, as I mentioned, most of the projects, actually all the projects that are being built today in construction that are in the water are near shore. Let's call it intertidal. And that price is 9.8 cents. And the projects are able to get built because people are building it. And whereas onshore is 8.5. Now, true offshore, as again, like 10 kilometers away, we'll need a price that is significantly higher than that. So if you look at Taiwan, for example, that is at 16 US cents. Now, arguably, it could be lower than that. And I believe it could be down in the low teens by now. And in Europe, for example, it's below 10. But they have a very strong industry. They have a history of building the projects, a core competency, all of the construction equipment and things like that. So true offshore, where we see these gigawatt scale projects, 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts, those kinds of projects are still in Vietnam going to be, very expensive at the moment.
Thank you, Logan. The next question, I believe this may be directed towards Chorgi's presentation again. We have here, what are the major investment blockers in Vietnam and how best to navigate them? I believe Chorgi already touched upon acquiring permits, some uncertainty regarding incentives and FITs, some legal implications as well. but perhaps he could give us an overview as well of what these challenges are and opportunities in the future and how best to avoid any stumbling blocks when doing business in Vietnam.
Thanks, Joel. Earlier, Logan also mentioned about the interplay between or among different sets of regulation relating to investment and in particular M&A. And that is one of the very pressing questions. How do many pieces of law come together, and sometimes not very consistently, in implementing a project for foreign investor? And as a practitioner assisting many investors coming in to do M&A, we find some of these inconsistencies very, very frustrating, because it all looks good and clear. Things are quite visible. We have the specific regulation, in fact, very precise. We can bring out the circulars or the decrees or even the official guidelines. But when it's implemented, all these pieces like jigsaw come together, but does not give you the picture. The picture is contorted. It's not the same one that we wanted to build. And having to navigate those complexities and inconsistencies will be one of the biggest challenges. And then earlier, I mentioned about the clarity of the FIT beyond the near-term horizon, especially for large-scale projects, wind onshore, in particular wind offshore. We're talking about hundreds of millions of investment. And if the FIT has not been made clear in advance for many years ahead of time, it's very difficult for investors to plan ahead for tens of hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. One of the areas, I also want to pick one of the questions that the audience asked relating to whether solar is still attractive as an investment, whether solar PPA is still attractive. And what I can share is the view from the industry is that if you look at the capacity being built so far for the solar ground-mounted, based on the highly attractive FIT of 9.35, 2020, the build capacity for ground-mounted has already way shot past the target. And we're talking about 5 gigawatt earlier. Logan has also mentioned that we have 5 gigawatt, and very soon, even for wind energy, we are surpassing that existing target. So with that, there is a curtailment, insufficient transmission capacity. There's a lot of discussion now on whether transmission sector will be given priority by the government, including having private sector involvement to construct transmission infrastructure. And without those infrastructure in place, areas which are highly dense in terms of radiation, Ninh Thuận, Binh Thuận, the 2 provinces in Vietnam, which do not use so much electricity, they are faced with the problem of having to convey or transmit electricity to the power consumption center. And I also do see the same issue may arise in the future when we talk about large offshore farms having, let's say, generation capacity of a few hundred megawatt each. Or if you're looking at what Logan has mentioned just now, in Taiwan, for example, there were gigawatt type of farms already for offshore wind. How would we be able to convey or transmit electricity from gigawatt offshore farm to the places in Vietnam where we need to consume the electricity? So transmission infrastructure is one of the key agenda, I believe, that needs to be resolved in the very near future. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you again, Chogi. Okay, we have another question, slightly different angle here. Any view or outlook on how EVs, electric vehicles, I assume, are going to affect development of energy projects in Vietnam? Logan, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure. I'm not an EV expert, but I'm happy to give my opinion on it. It's something that I follow. There is a company here called Vin Group. It's one of the largest companies in Vietnam, and they have recently started a automobile and electric scooter company that's called VinFast. And VinFast has an electric vehicle line, mostly of scooters, but moving towards cars. I think if you look globally, we're yet to get to the point where really, even in the United States or European countries, that sort of renewables are driving EV, or EV is driving renewables. They're certainly complementary to one another, but I think we're still a few years off before they're sort of one is driving the other. And in Vietnam, it's quite a long ways away. Now, there has been some sort of developments related to that, and that is several of the cities, including Hanoi, have announced that they will ban motor scooters by 2030. And the reality is that most likely, because of the way that the Hanoi and other cities in Vietnam are designed, it will be total gridlock if all of that is replaced with cars. So there will need to be a decent amount of electric scooters. And so I certainly believe that the EV market here will grow substantially. Whether or not it's really driving renewable energy, I think, is a different story, except related to rooftop. When you look at rooftop solar, there are certainly a number of, it's an industry that's taken off here, and there's a number of factories and companies that are focused on that. And so those two will interplay, but I think we're many years away before sort of EVs are going to actually affect the development of energy projects, because the fundamentals are simply that, the consumption is enough to drive those economics.
If you may allow me, Joel, to add on to the new technology dimension, yeah, I'm looking at how hydrogen power is being implemented in countries like, say, Japan and China, where the surplus electricity generation from, let's say, from solar or from wind can be used to generate power from hydrogen, breaking up water to generate hydrogen. Vietnam certainly is very far away from this, but one thing that I observed over my years of living and working in Vietnam, due to the lack of the incumbent technology, for example, we talk about EV, you need to talk about the pumping of the electricity into the vehicles. We don't have a very extensive type of infrastructure for petrol stations. And if you look at hydrogen, where the hydrogen would later be channeled through a new breed of petrol station, petrol kiosk, into hydrogen vehicles, there's a potential for Vietnam to leapfrog and not wait for the stages of development involving, let's say, petrol for car, EV for car. We go straight to hydrogen already. And as the industry mature, as the technology mature with the reduced cost, with the economic of scale, I do believe one day we do see the surplus electricity being produced by both ground-mounted solar in certain areas and also by gigawatt type of offshore wind. There may be a dimension for hydrogen in the power equation for Vietnam. How do you think, Logan? Yeah?
Actually, Mr. Lim, I'm right on board with you. I think that that's something, I mean, if you look at the trends in renewable energy around the world, this is clearly, during the coronavirus in terms of stimulus package, Europe has come out with a huge focus on hydrogen. In our Australia business, it's something that we've explored. There's multiple projects in Australia that are talking about powering all of Singapore with hydrogen through, subsea cables and the same. And so, I mean, those projects, are maybe novel, and we'll see if, how many of them materialize. But I think the trend is clear that hydrogen is coming. And I certainly agree with you on Vietnam, similar to the landline and cell phone, that it's a technology that we may be able to leapfrog here above and beyond. And I also agree with you, it's years off, but it is something to sort of write down and say, I should be following this and see how it goes.
Excellent. Thank you both for your insight. I think we have just around 6 minutes left. We could perhaps fit in one final question. So we have here, one of the major challenges in Vietnam is the grid capacity. Could you perhaps elaborate on some of these challenges and any opportunities that would present themselves for investors moving forwards to help solve these issues?
Let me put across 1-2 liners, and then after that, Logan would put more colors to this here. I think the issue with the grid capacity is because of the nature of the monopoly in the transmission industry. I think we are all aware in the past, both power generation and transmission are monopolized by the government under the Electricity of Vietnam (EVN). Today, power generation is so-called privatized, but the transmission infrastructure is still controlled by the state. So until and unless there's a liberalization on the infrastructure for transmission, where the private sector, including foreign invested entities, could partake here, there'll be a need for the Vietnamese government to continue to put in huge amount of investment into the transmission facility, which I believe at the moment, based on the policies direction, there's a focus on having higher level of budgets into the transmission, but there's certainly a constraint in terms of where the funds will be coming from.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Chogi. What I'd say is, it's a government entity, right? And so the government entity like anywhere around the world, they tend to move just slightly slower than the private sector. And the way the electricity system works is similarly like there's a power development plan. There's also an electricity development plan. And so those plans are implemented over time where they get connect the next grid and all of that. And it's a challenging position that Vietnam Electricity is in because, they may plan to build a transmission line to this area to connect some new power projects. But if those power projects don't get built, they've wasted money and they don't have a huge budget to do so and have many different resources. At the same time, on the private side, it's sort of, well, if I build my power project and you don't have a transmission line there, how am I supposed to deploy the power into the grid? So there's a bit of a chicken and egg. And so far, it has been that the private investors have taken the risk, and sometimes to their own detriment. If I build it, then EVN will sort it out. And I think that EVN will sort it out. But the issue is they wait until it becomes a problem, at least right now, to react to that. And that was certainly the case in Ninh Thuan and Binh Thuan on the solar, where you had way too many projects being built on an area that not much consumption is taking place. I think the good news is that is a lesson that is clearly learned in Vietnam, and whether it's the private sector or the government, and they now take grid interconnection much more seriously in terms of the vetting. So we've even seen in our own projects that where it used to be a much quicker review, the review process has become much more stringent to interconnect into the grid. And I just say, with power projects, anyone who wants to invest needs to do a lot of due diligence using a local consultant that understands the electrical grid and truly understand your point of interconnection on a case-by-case basis and run scenarios to try and reduce your own risks. But I also agree with you, Mr. Lim, that the ultimate way will be for private capital to get involved in trying to build up the transmission system, especially that the amount of projects which are owned, basically the amount of IPPs, independent power producers in this country, has grown just significantly. So the capital's there, it's just not right with, in the right hands to get it done.
Yeah, I do see one of the valve in this pressure cooker of transmission line is the introduction of the solar rooftop regulation, where C&I, commercial industry rooftop, can be built as long as below 1 megawatt. It can be off the grid. It can be off even the regulation of the government, and that is when you can produce and use electricity on site without needing to have a huge transmission facility being built to take care of all this moving around of electricity. And this area, C&I rooftop, is growing very fast. With the decree that with the circular has just been issued last year, there's a proliferation of C&I activities for factories, commercial building. And there's even BIPV, the building integrated PV, that is also coming up. And this is one area to address the question by one of the audience earlier, whether solar is still attractive. Rooftop solar in Vietnam is still very, very attractive. The FIT rate is attractive, it's excess of 8 cents, and there's a very clear legal framework. And to make it even more exciting, there's a lot of financial banks and local credit institutions, leasing companies, which are already starting to invest in small-scale C&I rooftop solar. So this industry, the direction is very clear. It's going to proliferate, and especially in city centers, large metropolitan like Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, there'll be a big need for solar rooftop. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Chorgi and Logan, I think that was a fantastic summary to end on. We do have a lot of other questions. Unfortunately, we do not have any more time today to answer those. However, we will share all of the questions with our speakers today, and they will answer offline. So I'd like to thank the audience for their questions today. We definitely appreciate your time and expertise that you added to today's topic. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been available to attend the event. Please also be aware that Electric and Power Vietnam, together with Renewable Energy Vietnam exhibition, will take place next June in Vietnam. As soon as we are able to safely hold physical events, this will be a great place to come and meet with the local industry in Vietnam. Further information on that will be released by Informa next month. So keep your eye out for any updates. So we hope to see you there. So on behalf of our guests, Mr. Lim Chor-gi and Mr. Logan Knox, thank you for your time. Stay safe and have a great day. Thank you.